The morning sun cast long shadows across the FBI field office in Denver as Special Agent Lee walked through the glass doors, her badge catching the light. She'd been with the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit for 8 years now, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the 3 cups of coffee, or maybe it was the manila envelope sitting on her desk, packed with witness statements she'd spent months collecting. "You really think you can take down a cop?" Agent Thompson asked, leaning against her cubicle wall. He wasn't trying to discourage her. After 15 years in the Bureau, he'd just seen too many corruption cases fall apart. Lee took a sip from her coffee mug, decorated with her kid's handprint from 2nd grade. "You know what my dad used to say? The bigger they think they are, the harder they fall." She smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. Her father had been a beat cop in San Francisco for 30 years. He taught her that a badge was a symbol of trust, not power. Opening the envelope, she spread out photos across her desk. They showed Detective Rodriguez of the Denver PD at various locations, high-end restaurants, private clubs, places a cop's salary shouldn't allow. But what caught the eye were the people he met. Business owners from the city's growing Asian district, each looking uncomfortable, some even afraid. "Look at this," Lee pointed to a timestamp on one photo. 3 days after this meeting, health inspectors hit this restaurant. Failed them on their first inspection in 5 years. Owner paid cash to someone. Suddenly they passed with flying colors. Thompson whistled low. Could be coincidence. Once is coincidence. 5 times is a pattern. Lee pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. "I've tracked similar incidents across 12 businesses in the past year alone. Always the same pattern. Meeting with Rodriguez, sudden inspection or permit issues, cash payments, problems disappear." Her phone buzzed, a text from her informant inside the department. "Another business owner's ready to talk," she said, grabbing her jacket. Vietnamese restaurant owner, new to the neighborhood. Rodriguez tried his usual routine, but this one's got security cameras. "Be careful," Thompson called after her. "Rodriguez has friends in high places." "That's what they all have," Lee replied, checking her service weapon. "Until they don't." The drive to the restaurant took her through Denver's changing neighborhoods. New businesses next to old ones, families who'd been here for generations alongside recent immigrants chasing their American dream. These were the people Rodriguez was preying on, people who worked too hard to lose everything to a corrupt cop. The restaurant was closed for lunch, but the owner, Mrs. Nguyen, was waiting. Her hands shook as she served tea, but her voice was steady. "My family spent everything to open this place," she said, her accent thick but clear. 3 generations of savings. When he came in, talking about problems with our permits. She paused, collecting herself. "In Vietnam, we knew about corrupt police. I came to America to escape that." Lee took out her notebook, old-school paper and pen. Sometimes people felt more comfortable with that than a recording device. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." As Mrs. Nguyen talked, Lee's pen moved quickly. The story was familiar. Rodriguez's friendly initial visit, the subtle threats wrapped in concern, the suggestion that protection money could solve their problems. But this time was different. Mrs. Nguyen had installed security cameras after a break-in last year. They caught everything. "My son said I was crazy to talk to the FBI," Mrs. Nguyen admitted, pouring more tea. "Said Rodriguez would find out, would hurt our business, maybe worse." Lee looked up from her notes. "Your son's right to be worried. But you're braver for being here anyway. That's what makes America work. People willing to stand up, even when it's hard." Back in her car, Lee reviewed her notes. With Mrs. Nguyen's testimony and the security footage, they were getting close. But Rodriguez was smart. He'd been running this scheme for years, and he had protectors in the department. Taking him down wouldn't just mean proving his guilt. It would mean breaking through the wall of silence that protected him. Her phone rang, the district attorney's office. "Agent Lay, we need to talk about your investigation into Detective Rodriguez." The voice was tense, official. "There are concerns about your methods." Lee smiled grimly. Rodriguez was feeling the heat, trying to use his connections. "Unhappy to discuss my methods," she replied. "In fact, I have some new evidence you should see." That evening, as she picked up dinner from her favorite food truck, Lee noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. The message was clear: she was being watched. But that was fine. Let them watch. She'd learned long ago that justice wasn't about being the strongest or having the most friends in high places. It was about being right and being relentless. At home, she spread her case files across her kitchen table. Photos, statements, financial records, pieces of a puzzle showing how one corrupt cop had built a small empire of fear and extortion. Her daughter's homework sat at the other end of the table, math problems waiting to be solved. "Mom, why do you work so late?" her daughter asked, coming in for a glass of water. Lee looked at the girl, saw the same determination she'd had at that age. Because sometimes people with power forget it's supposed to be used to help others, not hurt them. Somebody has to remind them. Her daughter nodded, understanding more than most kids her age would. "Like your dad always said about the badge." "Exactly." Lee smiled, touching the old police badge she kept framed on the wall. "It's a shield to protect people, not a weapon to frighten them." Late into the night she worked, building her case piece by piece. Rodriguez had underestimated her, just like others had before. He thought his badge made him untouchable, his connections unbeatable. But he'd never faced someone who understood both sides of the law, someone who'd grown up respecting the badge while learning how to spot those who dishonored it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Rodriguez's friends would try to block her investigation, witnesses might get scared, evidence might disappear. But Lee was ready. She had truth on her side and the patience to see justice done right. As she finally headed to bed, her phone buzzed one last time. Another business owner, ready to talk. The wall of silence was cracking, one brave voice at a time. Rodriguez might have the power of corruption on his side, but Lee had something stronger, the power of justice and the determination to see it through to the end. Detective Rodriguez's office was exactly what you'd expect from a decorated police officer. Awards lined the walls, photos showed him shaking hands with city officials, and his desk displayed an Officer of the Year trophy from just 3 months ago. But Agent Lee knew better than to trust appearances. After 20 years on the force, Rodriguez had mastered the art of looking spotless while running one of the most sophisticated corruption schemes she'd ever seen. "Your record is impressive," Lee said, sitting across from him during their first official interview. She'd requested it through proper channels, playing it straight. 15 commendations, 3 life-saving medals, even a key to the city. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from his pressed uniform to his perfectly polished badge. "I believe in serving my community," he said, smile never reaching his eyes. "Been doing it since I was 22. Lee opened her folder, laying out photos one by one. "Interesting way of serving," she said quietly. "Meeting with business owners late at night, health inspections that fail then mysteriously pass, permit problems that disappear after private conversations." The smile stayed fixed, but something flickered in Rodriguez's eyes. "You're fishing, agent. I meet with lots of business owners. Community policing, you know how it works." "I do," Lee agreed. "My father was a cop. Taught me that trust goes both ways. The community trusts us with power, we trust them to build honest businesses." She tapped one photo. "Hard to build honest businesses when they're being squeezed for protection money." Rodriguez's laugh was practiced, easy. "Sounds like you've been watching too many movies. I help these people navigate city bureaucracy, nothing more." "Like you helped the Kim family? The grocery store burned down last month after they refused to pay for your navigation services." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Tragic accident," Rodriguez said softly. "Faulty wiring, according to the fire marshal." "The same fire marshal who got his job thanks to your recommendation." Lee kept her voice neutral, but her eyes locked onto his. "Funny how that works." Walking out of the precinct later, Lee felt eyes following her. Rodriguez's influence ran deep, uniform officers, detectives, even some administrators. They'd been looking the other way for years, either bought off or too scared to speak up. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter about dinner plans. Real life didn't stop for investigations. Lee smiled, remembering how her father balanced police work with family time. He taught her that staying human was what separated good cops from bad ones. At home that evening, while helping with homework, Lee's mind kept returning to Rodriguez's perfect facade. On paper, he was everything a cop should be: decorated, respected, involved in the community. But paper didn't show the fear in Mrs. Nguyen's eyes, or the desperation of other business owners who'd mortgaged everything for their American dream, only to find themselves paying tribute to a modern-day protection racket. "Mom, you're not listening," her daughter said, waving a hand in front of her face. "I asked about dividing fractions." "Sorry, sweetie." Lee focused on the math problem, pushing aside thoughts of Rodriguez for a moment. But later, after bedtime stories and goodnight hugs, she returned to her case files. New evidence was surfacing daily. A pattern emerged. Rodriguez targeted immigrant-owned businesses, ones less likely to trust law enforcement or know their rights. He'd start small, offering advice about regulations. Then came warnings about potential problems, followed by actual inspections or permit issues. Finally, the solution: regular payments for his consulting services. The next morning, Lee met with another witness, a former beat cop who'd worked Rodriguez's district. "He runs it like his personal kingdom," the officer said, constantly looking over his shoulder in the quiet diner. "Nobody opens a business without paying tribute. Nobody gets city contracts without his approval." "Why didn't you report it?" Lee asked, though she knew the answer. "You know why. Last guy who tried. Found drugs in his locker. Got fired. His wife lost her city job too. Message was clear: cross Rodriguez, lose everything." Lee nodded, adding notes to her growing file. Rodriguez had built his empire carefully, using fear and favors in equal measure. Officers who played along got choice assignments and overtime. Those who didn't found themselves working graveyard shifts in the worst neighborhoods. But empires could fall. Lee had seen it before: corrupt cops who thought they were untouchable, until one person refused to be intimidated, one piece of evidence slipped through, one witness finally spoke up. Her phone rang, Mrs. Nguyen, voice shaking. "They came to inspect again. Said they found rats. But there are no rats. We are clean, you can see. Take photos," Lee instructed. "Document everything. We'll add it to the file." Rodriguez was getting nervous, making mistakes, pressuring witnesses, rushing inspections, leaving paper trails. He'd gotten away with it for so long, he'd forgotten that power built on fear had a weakness. When people stopped being afraid, it crumbled. That night, driving home, Lee noticed 2 police cruisers following her. Standard intimidation tactic. But they didn't know what her father had taught her years ago. The truth doesn't need protection. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. Tomorrow would bring more witnesses, more evidence, more pieces of the puzzle. Rodriguez might have built his kingdom on badges and bribes, but Lee was building something stronger. A case founded on truth, backed by law, and fueled by the courage of people who'd finally decided to stand up. The evidence room at Denver PD had always been a fortress of security, until now. Agent Lee stared at the empty evidence box where the surveillance footage should have been. 3 weeks of careful documentation vanished overnight. "System shows no unauthorized access," the evidence clerk said, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes things get misfiled." Lee touched the label on the box, still crisp and new. "Misfiled." Right. She'd expected this, had prepared for it. Rodriguez's influence ran deep, turning the department into a maze of locked doors and turned backs. Back at her office, she pulled out her backup files. "Never trust a single copy," her father used to say. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence existed in triplicate. One for official channels, one secure at the FBI, and one in a place only she knew about. Her phone lit up with a text from Officer Rivera, a rookie who'd been helping her quietly. "Meeting in the garage. Important." These days, nobody trusted office conversations. The parking garage was dim and cold. Rivera stood between 2 concrete pillars, uniform crisp but eyes tired. "They're watching us," he said without preamble. "Rodriguez has guys checking computer records, phone logs. Anyone who talks to FBI gets marked." "How's the pressure?" Lee asked, knowing the answer. "Bad. Yesterday my partner got called to the captain's office. Today I'm assigned to foot patrol in the warehouse district." He laughed without humor. Message received. Lee nodded. The blue wall of silence wasn't just about loyalty, it was about survival. Young officers learned quick: play along or watch your career die slow. "I've got something though," Rivera said, glancing around. "Remember that domestic violence call last month? Rodriguez showed up even though it wasn't his district." Turns out the husband owns 3 restaurants downtown. Let me guess, all paying protection money. Better. Wife recorded everything on her phone. Rodriguez offering to forget the incident if the husband increased his payments. Lee's pulse quickened. Where's the recording? Safe. Not at the station, not at home. Somewhere they won't look. Later that day, Lee sat in her car watching Rodriguez's usual coffee spot. He held court there most afternoons, receiving visits from officers, business owners, city officials. A parade of influence and intimidation, all hidden in plain sight. Her daughter called. "Mom, can you pick up dinner? I've got study group tonight." Already got it covered. There's lasagna in the fridge. Even with the investigation consuming her days, Lee kept her promises. Family anchored you, kept you human when the job tried to turn you hard. The next morning brought more walls. Interview requests denied. Witnesses suddenly unavailable. Evidence marked as sealed by internal affairs. Rodriguez's network flexing its muscles, showing who really controlled the flow of information. But walls had cracks. A clerk accidentally left a file on her desk. Records showing Rodriguez's unit had the highest number of dismissed cases in the department. A detective mentioned casually that security cameras in certain areas had been malfunctioning during key incidents. Small acts of rebellion from people tired of looking the other way. Lee's father had told her about the blue wall. It's meant to protect good cops doing a tough job, he'd said, not hide bad cops doing dirty work. She found allies in unexpected places. A janitor who overheard conversations in late-night offices. A dispatcher who noticed patterns in calls being redirected. A parking attendant who kept detailed records of unusual meetings. But for every alley, there were 3 obstacles. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Officers who helped found themselves on midnight shifts or dangerous assignments. They're trying to freeze you out, Thompson warned during their daily coffee meet. Departments closing ranks. Even the chiefs avoiding FBI calls. Lee sipped her coffee, watching people hurry past the cafe window. Walls don't just protect, they trap. Rodriguez built his network on fear and favors, but fear fades. Favors run out. That afternoon, she got a call from Mrs. Nguyen. "My son," she said, voice breaking. "They arrested him. Said they found drugs in his car." "Don't post bail," Lee instructed. "I'll handle it." Rodriguez was escalating, getting sloppy. Fear made people careful. Desperation made them make mistakes. The wall was cracking. Officers who'd looked the other way for years started questioning their loyalty. Was protecting Rodriguez worth risking their own careers? Their own freedom? Lee's phone buzzed. Another text from Rivera. "Got something big. Meet tonight." She texted back, "Not at the garage. Too obvious." They met at a 24-hour diner instead, slides of eggs and coffee providing cover. Rivera passed her a thumb drive under the table. "Bodycam footage," he whispered. "Rodriguez forgot some of us know how to access the cloud backup. Shows him collecting money, making threats. 3 months' worth." Lee pocketed the drive carefully. "You know what this means?" Rivera nodded, fear and determination mixing in his eyes. "Means I'm probably looking at traffic duty till retirement, if I'm lucky. Or it means you're helping take down someone who betrayed everything that badge stands for." The wall was breaking, 1 brick at a time. Officers tired of living with compromise. Witnesses finding their courage. Evidence surfaced from forgotten corners. Rodriguez had built his power on the department's loyalty. But loyalty, true loyalty, wasn't about protecting corruption. It was about protecting the oath they'd all sworn, to serve and protect the people, not prey on them. The break in the case came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Officer Rivera's hands shook as he placed the USB drive on Agent Lee's desk. It wasn't just bodycam footage, it was the key to unraveling everything. "I almost didn't come," he said, rainwater dripping from his uniform. "They suspended my partner yesterday. Said it was for paperwork issues, but we both know better." Lee plugged in the drive, and the truth played out in high definition. Rodriguez, caught in perfect clarity, taking envelopes of cash behind a restaurant. His voice crystal clear as he explained to a business owner how unfortunate it would be if health inspectors found violations in their kitchen. "He got sloppy," Rivera said, watching over her shoulder. "Started thinking he was untouchable. Forgot about the automatic cloud backup for bodycams. The footage kept playing. Rodriguez meeting with other officers, handing out assignments that looked routine on paper but targeted specific businesses. Him laughing with health inspectors about problem establishments that needed extra attention. "This is what we needed," Lee said, already making copies. "Hard evidence that can't be explained away." But Rodriguez wasn't done fighting. By afternoon, word spread through the department about a rookie officer found with drugs in his locker. Rivera's locker. "It's not mine," he insisted when Lee visited him at home. "They're trying to discredit me before I can testify." "I know," Lee assured him, "and we can prove it. Remember what you told me about the security cameras in the locker room?" Rivera's eyes widened. "The maintenance log. Every camera gets checked weekly. There's no way they could have." "Exactly. Either the cameras caught someone planting evidence or the log shows tampering. Either way, they made a mistake." The next day, Lee received an unexpected visitor. Officer Chen, a veteran cop who'd worked with Rodriguez for 15 years, walked into her office and closed the door. "I'm done," she said simply. "Done watching him destroy everything we're supposed to stand for." Chen had kept records, dates, amounts, names. A notebook full of every time Rodriguez had used his power to pressure businesses, manipulate evidence, or silence witnesses. "Why now?" Lee asked, carefully photographing each page. Chen touched her badge. "My daughter just entered the police academy. She asked me what it means to wear the shield. I couldn't look her in the eye anymore." The evidence mounted. Other officers, inspired by Rivera and Chen, started coming forward. Each had a piece of the puzzle: text messages, recorded conversations, documentation of special assignments. Rodriguez's network was unraveling. His supporters, sensing the change in wind, began distancing themselves. The wall of silence cracked wider. Lee worked late into the night, piecing everything together. Her daughter brought her dinner at the office, homework spread across an empty desk while her mother built the case. "Why did bad cops go bad?" her daughter asked, watching Lee sort through photos. Lee paused, remembering her father's words. "Power changes people. Some forget the badge means serving others, not yourself. But there are always good cops who remember." The next morning, Rodriguez made his fatal mistake. Feeling the pressure, he called a meeting with his closest allies in the department, but one of them was wearing a wire. The recording was devastating. Rodriguez, his usual calm shattered, outlined plans to destroy evidence, pressure witnesses, and handle anyone who threatened his operation. "He's scared," Thompson observed, listening to the tape. "Scared people make mistakes." Lee nodded. "Fear's contagious. His whole network is infected now. Everyone wondering who'll be the next to fall." The turning point came full circle when Mrs. Nguyen's security cameras caught Rodriguez in one last act of desperation. He showed up at her restaurant after hours, all pretense of professionalism gone. But Mrs. Nguyen wasn't afraid anymore. As Rodriguez threatened her family, her cameras recorded everything. Her son, released after the drug charges fell apart, called Lee immediately. "Your father would be proud," Thompson told Lee as they prepared the arrest warrants. "Taking down corruption from the inside isn't easy." Lee touched the old badge on her wall, remembering. He always said the hardest part of being a good cop isn't catching bad guys, it's standing up to bad cops who think they're above the law. The evidence was irrefutable now. Rodriguez had built his kingdom on fear and favors, but fear had turned to courage, and favors had run dry. His own arrogance, his belief in his untouchable status, had led him to make the mistakes that would bring him down. As Lee prepared for the final phase of the operation, she thought about all the people who'd risked everything to stand up: Rivera, Chen, Mrs. Nguyen, and dozens of others. Each one choosing what was right over what was easy. The thin blue line wasn't meant to be a wall protecting corruption. It was a line between right and wrong, justice and abuse, service and selfishness. Rodriguez had crossed that line years ago, thinking his badge made him invincible. The morning everything changed started like any other. Agent Lee arrived at her office early, coffee in hand, mind already racing through the day's tasks. But today was different. Today was when Rodriguez would learn just how badly he'd underestimated her. "They're moving evidence," Officer Rivera reported, voice tense over the phone. 3 guys from Rodriguez's unit clearing out filing cabinets. They know something's coming. Lee checked her watch. The warrant would arrive in 2 hours. Let them try. We've got copies of everything. She'd learned from her father that corrupt cops always made the same mistake. They thought they could erase their tracks, not realizing that truth left marks that couldn't be cleaned away. At the precinct, tension hung thick in the air. Officers clustered in small groups, whispering. They'd seen the signs, FBI agents coming and going, internal affairs suddenly busy, Rodriguez's allies growing quiet. Rodriguez himself sat in his office, still projecting confidence through the glass walls. But Lee noticed the small tells, the constant checking of his phone, the way his eyes darted to every passing officer. "Your case is falling apart," he said when Lee walked in, uninvited. "My lawyer says you've got nothing but rumors and coincidences." Lee placed a single photo on his desk. It showed him accepting an envelope behind the Vietnamese restaurant, Mrs. Nguyen's security cameras catching the moment perfectly. "Funny thing about coincidences," Lee said quietly. "They stop being coincidental when there's video evidence." Rodriguez's smile flickered. "One photo doesn't prove anything. I help these people navigate bureaucracy. Everything I do is legal." "Really?" Lee pulled out her phone, played a recording. Rodriguez's own voice filled the office, threatening a business owner's family. "Sounds more like extortion to me." The change was instant. Rodriguez's practiced charm vanished, replaced by something harder, colder. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I've got friends in places you can't touch." "Had friends," Lee corrected. "Amazing how quickly they disappear when they realize they might go down with you." She watched him process this, saw the moment he understood. His network was crumbling. Officers he trusted were turning evidence. Witnesses were speaking up. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he snarled, standing. "You're destroying years of community relationships. I keep order in these neighborhoods. I make sure things run smooth." "You prey on hardworking people," Lee replied. "You turn their American dream into a nightmare. That badge means protecting people, not exploiting them." Rodriguez moved around his desk, using his height to loom over her. An intimidation tactic that might have worked on others. "Last chance, agent. Walk away." Things can get very difficult for FBI agents who don't know their limits. Lee didn't step back. "Funny. That's exactly what you told Mrs. Nguyen when she refused to pay. How'd that work out?" His hand slammed the desk. "That old woman should have kept her mouth shut. Do you know how many favors I called in to build this system? How many years it took to get everyone in line?" Lee smiled. The recorder in her pocket was catching everything. "No, but I'm sure the grand jury will be very interested in hearing all about it." That's when Rodriguez made his final mistake. Desperation overrode judgment, and he reached for her arm. "You're not walking out of here with those files." In one smooth motion, Lee stepped back, badge out. "Assaulting a federal agent? Not smart. But then again, you haven't made many smart choices lately." 2 FBI agents appeared in the doorway, right on cue. The precinct had gone silent, every eye watching as Rodriguez realized the trap he'd walked into. "Detective Rodriguez," Lee said formally, "you're under arrest for corruption, extortion, and now assault on a federal officer." As they led him out, officers lined the halls. Some looked away, ashamed of what their silence had protected. Others stood straighter, relieved that the shadow over their department was finally lifting. In the parking lot, Lee's phone rang. It was her daughter. "Mom? Are you still coming to my presentation tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it," Lee promised, watching Rodriguez being placed in a federal vehicle. "Just finished cleaning up something at work." Later, reviewing the day's events with Thompson, Lee thought about all the small moments that had led to this. Mrs. Nguyen's courage, Rivera's integrity, Chen's conscience. One person standing up had given others the strength to do the same. He really thought he was untouchable, Thompson mused. All that power, all those connections. Lee nodded. "That's the thing about corruption. It looks strong, but it's built on fear. And when people stop being afraid." She placed Rodriguez's case file in her finished box, thinking of her father's words. "The badge is heavy because it carries the weight of public trust. Wear it with honor, or don't wear it at all." Rodriguez had forgotten that. He turned his badge into a weapon, used it to build an empire of fear and favors. But in the end, he'd learned what every corrupt cop eventually discovers: no one is above the law, and justice has a way of catching up. The FBI's operation moved like clockwork. As dawn broke over Denver, teams of agents swept through the city, executing search warrants at multiple locations simultaneously. Rodriguez's carefully built empire was crumbling in real time. Agent Lee stood in the precinct's evidence room, supervising as her team catalogued years of buried secrets. "Check everything twice," she instructed. "Every folder, every drawer. He's had years to hide things." The evidence told a story that even Lee hadn't fully grasped. Hidden compartments revealed ledgers tracking payments from dozens of businesses. Computer files showed a network of corrupt officials extending beyond the police department into City Hall itself. "Look at this," Thompson called out, holding up a stack of photos. He kept trophies, pictures of every business owner he shook down, every cop he compromised. Lee studied the images, faces she recognized from her investigation, all caught in moments of fear or shame. Rodriguez had enjoyed his power, documented it like a hunter mounting prizes on a wall. The sting operation itself was flawless. An undercover agent, posing as a new business owner, had caught Rodriguez in one final act of extortion. The recording was damning: threats, demands for money, promises of protection that sounded more like threats. "You don't understand how things work here," Rodriguez had said, his words now playing back in crystal clear audio. "Pay the fee, or maybe something happens to your nice new restaurant. Accidents happen all the time in this neighborhood." But Rodriguez hadn't been talking to a scared immigrant business owner. He'd been talking to an FBI agent wearing a wire, with backup teams waiting outside. At the federal building, Lee watched through one-way glass as Rodriguez sat in interrogation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat on his collar, the nervous tapping of his fingers. "He's been in there 3 hours," Thompson noted. "Hasn't asked for a lawyer yet." "He still thinks he can talk his way out," Lee replied. "That's what happens when you get away with things for too long. You start believing your own lies." Inside the interrogation room, the evidence mounted. Financial records showing unexplained deposits, surveillance photos of meetings with known criminals, witness statements from officers he corrupted and business owners he'd extorted. Rodriguez's facade finally cracked when they played Mrs. Nguyen's recording. Her quiet voice describing years of harassment, the fear in her family's eyes, the weight of his threats on their dreams. "You don't understand," he burst out. "These neighborhoods needed structure, someone to keep order. Everything I did was for the greater good." Lee had heard it before. Corrupt cops justifying their actions as necessary evil. But there was nothing necessary about crushing honest people's dreams, nothing good about turning authority into oppression. The arrests spread like ripples in a pond. 3 other officers from Rodriguez's inner circle, 2 health inspectors, a clerk in the licensing department, each one flipping on the others, desperate to save themselves. Back at her office, Lee received an unexpected visit. Officer Chen, who'd helped break the case, stood in her doorway, looking uncertain. "The other officers," Chen said quietly. "The ones who looked the other way all these years, what happens to them?" Lee considered this. "They'll have to live with their choices. But the department has a chance to rebuild now, do things right." The evidence processing took days. Each new discovery revealed another layer of corruption. Rodriguez hadn't just built a criminal enterprise, he'd created a shadow government controlling who could do business, who could succeed, who had to fail. He was smart, Thompson admitted, reviewing case files. Used the system's own rules against itself. Health inspections, permit requirements, zoning laws, all legitimate tools turned into weapons. But smart wasn't enough when the truth came out. Rodriguez's perfect record started showing cracks. Cases he'd handled were reopened, revealing patterns of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. The final blow came from his own recordings. Rodriguez had kept detailed audio logs, thinking they would protect him. Instead, they documented years of crimes in his own voice. Lee's daughter found her late one night, still reviewing evidence. "Did you catch all the bad guys?" she asked, bringing her mother fresh coffee. "The main one," Lee smiled. "Sometimes that's enough to change everything." The department would need time to heal. Trust, once broken, didn't rebuild overnight. But already changes were visible. Officers walked taller, no longer burdened by secrets. Business owners began reporting problems without fear. Mrs. Nguyen's restaurant held a celebration dinner. The community gathered, sharing food and stories, finally free to speak openly about the shadow that had hung over them. "My father used to say that power reveals people," Lee told Thompson as they watched Rodriguez being processed for federal detention. "Give someone authority and you'll see who they really are." Rodriguez had revealed himself as a predator, using his badge to hunt instead of protect. But he'd underestimated the courage of ordinary people, the strength of truth, and the persistence of one FBI agent who believed that justice was more than just a word. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of Rodriguez's trial. Agent Lee sat in the front row, watching as the man who'd thought himself untouchable faced the consequences of his actions. Rodriguez's lawyer tried to spin a tale of misunderstanding, painting his client as a dedicated officer caught in bureaucratic confusion. But evidence doesn't lie, and there was mountains of it. The defendant didn't just break the law, the prosecutor began, spreading photos across the jury box. He broke trust. Trust placed in him by his badge, by his community, and by the very people he swore to protect. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Mrs. Nguyen, voice steady now, described years of extortion. "He took more than money," she said. "He took our peace of mind, our belief in the American dream." Officer Chen testified about the internal workings of Rodriguez's network, how he turned the department's own systems into tools of corruption, using legitimate authority for illegitimate ends. The bodycam footage played in high definition on courthouse screens. Rodriguez's voice, clear and damning, as he threatened business owners. His face, caught in perfect clarity, accepting envelopes of cash in dark alleys. "My client was maintaining order," his lawyer argued. These were voluntary contributions for extra police protection. But the evidence told a different story. Financial records showed millions flowing through hidden accounts. Text messages revealed coordination with corrupt officials. Photos documented meetings with known criminals. Lee's daughter sat through part of the trial, watching her mother present evidence. During a break, she asked, "Why did it take so long to catch him?" "Because fear is powerful," Lee explained. "It makes people stay quiet, look the other way. But courage is contagious. Once one person stands up, others find their strength." Rodriguez himself took the stand, still trying to maintain his image. "Everything I did was for the community," he claimed. Sometimes maintaining order requires unconventional methods. The prosecutor's cross-examination was devastating. "Was it for the community when you threatened Mrs. Nguyen's family? When you planted evidence on Officer Rivera? When you used your badge to build a criminal empire?" The jury took only 6 hours to reach their verdict. The word guilty echoed through the courthouse 15 times, once for each federal charge. 15 years. Thompson whistled low as they left the courthouse. No possibility of early release. But the true impact went beyond prison time. The case triggered a complete overhaul of department oversight. New systems were put in place to prevent abuse of power. Officers who'd looked the other way faced reviews and retraining. In the neighborhoods Rodriguez once controlled, change bloomed like flowers after rain. New businesses opened without fear of extortion. Community meetings actually discussed community problems, not just nodding at whatever the police wanted. Lee found Mrs. Nguyen at her restaurant, now thriving without the weight of protection payments. The place was packed, filled with the smell of good food and the sound of happy customers. "My grandson wants to be police officer," Mrs. Nguyen said, serving Lee a bowl of steaming pho. "Before, this would scare me. Now, maybe he can be good officer, like your father." The department itself was healing. Officer Rivera, cleared of all false charges, led a new community outreach program. Officer Chen helped design transparency measures to prevent future abuse. "The thin blue line isn't about protecting bad cops," Lee's father had always said. "It's about protecting the honor of good ones." In the end, Rodriguez's fall served as both warning and wake-up call. Other departments across the country studied the case, implementing reforms to prevent similar corruption. Lee kept the case file in her office as a reminder. Not of victory, but of vigilance. Power could corrupt anyone, turn protectors into predators. The price of justice wasn't just catching bad guys, it was staying good yourself. 1 year after the trial, Lee spoke at the police academy. Looking at the fresh faces, she shared what her father had taught her, what Rodriguez had forgotten, and what every officer needed to remember. The badge isn't power, it's responsibility. It doesn't put you above the law. It holds you to a higher standard. Wear it with honor, or don't wear it at all. In her office, next to her father's old badge, Lee kept a letter from Mrs. Nguyen's grandson, now in his first year at the academy. It read simply, "Thank you for showing us what a real police officer should be." The story of Rodriguez became a teaching case, a reminder that no one is untouchable when good people find the courage to stand up. His fall from power proved what Lee had always believed, that justice might be slow, but it was unstoppable when truth and courage worked together.